This Kenyan road connecting the cities of Mai Mahiu and Narok in the western region of Nairobi used to be just a road, same as thousands of others. But one day that changed. In March 2018, a massive crack ripped through the road and the land around it, stretching for several miles. It reached a depth of 50 feet and in some places a width of up to 65 feet. The crack swallowed part of the Nairobi-Narok highway, making it impossible to travel on. What's that crack? And where did it come from? It's a known fact that ruptures of this magnitude don't just happen overnight. Some sources also point out that linear features were noticeable in this area, and they align perfectly with the orientation of the crack. See for yourself. The feature is clearly visible and it cuts across the landscape. Well, at least that's what some authors claim. If it seems to you that the feature looks like a road and there are plenty of such roads around, you're not alone. I get that feeling too. But what actually happened? What forces caused the crack to pop up all of a sudden? The answer is actually very simple. It was rain. Geologists worldwide agree that there was already a crack in this place that had gone unnoticed for a long time because it was filled with volcanic ash. The ash appeared a long time ago due to eruptions in the distant past, but there was so much of it that no one even suspected something was wrong with the ground. Then came heavy rains, and the water washed away the deep layers of ash, causing it to collapse. A hole in the ground formed really fast, and I mean it. One local guy saw a crack go through his house and barely had time to grab some of his stuff before his house fell underground. Overall, what happened can be called a tragedy that affected the lives of many ordinary people. For example, now it's unclear how safe the new railway in the region is and whether some train will end up going underground along with a house at any random moment. Interestingly, the location of the crack has reignited long-standing debates about whether Africa will split apart one day. It seems these are genuine and scientifically grounded hypotheses, but for now, let's enjoy some coffee. Just an unobtrusive reminder to hit the like button if you usually do that, and thanks to everyone who understands my wish to remain anonymous. To start with, it's important to mention that the earth under our feet is constantly moving. Right now, as you watch this video, and also at night when you're sleeping, when you're commuting to work or school, it is literally all the time. The continents where most of us live are thin tectonic plates floating and rubbing on top of the boiling sphere of molten rock. Like croutons that have been tossed into a very hot bowl of soup. This movement happens over millions of geological years. Tectonic plates collide with each other and pull apart, causing their edges to deform and bend. This is how mountain ranges form and oceans expand. For instance, sometimes the plates can slide past each other, leading to landscapes like the San Andreas Fault. And sometimes the plates collide with each other, their edges push up, and then mountain ranges form, like the Himalayas. Yeah, all this didn't just pop out of nowhere. Such processes usually happen unnoticed, slowly, moving at a few inches a year, or about as fast as toenails grow. Although I think they actually grow pretty fast. But alright, not on a planetary scale, obviously. In the past, scientists thought that Africa, meaning the entire continent, was all one tectonic plate. But since the 1970s, evidence has been piling up that the African plate is gradually splitting into two new plates called the Nubian and Somali plates. And this is happening along the East African Rift. The farther the plates drift apart, the bigger this rift becomes. A piece of Africa is slowly trying to crawl away from the rest of the continent. The East African Rift is actually really big. I mean, like, really. It stretches a staggering 2,175 miles from the Red Sea in the north to Mozambique in the southeast of the African continent. That's longer than the distance from Lisbon to Warsaw if you're driving, and if the rift were in Europe, it'd stretch from Spain all the way to Finland. The Great Rift Valley, which partly touches the fault, gives birth to breathtaking landscapes, and at the same time helps us grasp what forces shape our planet. Spoiler, they are incredibly powerful. You can already see today how the spot where eventually a crack will happen in the future divides the continent into two big and close but separate mountain ranges. By the way, all the great African lakes were formed as a result of a rift at different times, but still. However, the rift creates not only bodies of water, giant cliffs, and numerous volcanoes all over the East African Rift, the bubbling lava lake Erta Ale in Ethiopia, where the lava flow stretches for 10 miles, This whole landscape and all these features are evidence of Africa's gradual splitting apart. And just to be clear, rifts, meaning big breaks in the Earth's crust, are impossible to confuse with anything. They show a very characteristic topography, with a series of depressions surrounded by higher terrain. In short, geologists are not confused. It's a rift. It started to form about 25 million years ago, and in those 25 million years, part of the African continent moved away by just a tiny distance. Now imagine how long it would really take for a piece of land to actually move somewhere. This is what our planet looked like 25 million years ago when it all started. Quite a nice place. Back then, almost all the animals we know today existed, but they looked different because evolution hadn't refined them to their current forms yet. Around this time, the first dogs and bears appeared, along with hyenas, and it seems like saber-toothed cats started to appear. The ancestors of modern elephants, which had previously only lived in Africa, spread to the Eurasian continent, setting the stage for Asian elephants. The dinosaurs were already gone, and it was, about 23 million years until the first human appeared. It's believed that the Homo genus originated roughly 2 million years ago. And while all this was happening, the continent started to split apart. It kept splitting, and today we've got some tiny cracks. GPS data shows that the Nubian and Somali plates are pulling apart through the East African Rift at an average speed of 0.3 inches a year. And while it's still unclear when exactly the split will happen, scientists believe that the process will take tens of millions more years at this pace. But scientists wouldn't be scientists if they didn't start imagining and calculating how this would look, so they think that over millions of years, the Somali plate will break away from the rest of Africa and a new ocean basin will form. The process definitely won't stop. Yes, it's slow, but it's constant. The plates move, cracks appear, and the world changes. And although today the rift remains above sea level, as it expands, the land in the valley will gradually sink. Right now, the entire floor of the Rift Valley around Afar is covered with volcanic rocks. This means the lithosphere here is thinned out almost to the point of completely breaking apart. Just a little more and it'll tear. Well, I'm talking about geological a little more, which takes millions of years. You get what I mean. But when that happens, a new sea will start to form, long and narrow. Magma will solidify and water will pour in. Ultimately, over tens of millions of years, the expansion of the seafloor will progress along the length of the rift. After some more time, the sea will turn into an ocean. The African continent will shrink, and a new large island will appear in the Indian Ocean. But why did the plate actually, crawl somewhere? It turns out that geologists and geophysicists are still debating the possible reasons for this. They have a couple of theories, and the dominant current theory is that heat plumes inside the Earth's mantle are causing the lithosphere beneath Kenya and Ethiopia to dome and stretch. I guess you could say that our planet has a bit of a swelling. So the lithosphere is stretching, getting thinner, and this leads to huge volcanic eruptions that spew lava from the cracks like flows of water. Faults appear in the crust. The East African Rift is one of the most tectonically active regions in the world. Seismic and volcanic activity happens all along it, and it's responsible for creating mountains, including Kilimanjaro and Mount Kenya. By the way, don't think that splitting a continent into two parts is some super unique event for our planet. This kind of thing has been happening throughout history. For example, it led to the creation of the Atlantic Ocean when the ancient continent of Gondwana broke apart. Have you ever noticed how Africa and South America fit together perfectly, just like puzzle pieces? That's because they were once a single landmass, eventually separated by the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, and water, too. However, the movement of plates doesn't just happen so a new ocean can form between them. Yeah, most likely the Somali plate will completely separate from the Nubian plate and create a separate landmass. That's the new island, and it's pretty big, comparable to Madagascar or New Zealand. This island is likely to consist of sections of today's Ethiopia, Somalia, Kenya, and Tanzania. I say today's because we have no idea what countries will be in this region in tens of millions of years, or if there will be any at all. But here's what's interesting. Some scientists suggest that eventually India, Somalia, and Madagascar might become one continent. This will happen, however, in about 200 million years, not any sooner. The creation of a new continent will lead to the formation of this Himalaya mountain range, which will run along the west coast of India. Yeah, they've even come up with a name for it. In the southwest of India, from Trivandrum to Karachi, a depression forms, and a piece of the African continent known as the Horn of Africa, including Somalia, will cover or wipe out this area, creating new mountains. The beaches of Malabar will be scooped up like with a bulldozer, and coral reefs and low-lying areas will fold up to become high peaks. Mumbai will lie at the foot of the Somalaya Range, just like today New Delhi lies at the foot of the Himalayas. Or more like the area where Mumbai is. Well, again, you get what I mean. The Seychelles Islands will also move closer to the Lakshadweep Islands, along with the Malabar sediments. They could become a mountain range, 5 miles high. I don't know how the scientists calculated it, but they did. Although what I like the most is that coral reefs may rise high into the mountains, because this is no joke. Even today, coral reefs are actually found at high altitudes from time to time, and not because climbers dropped them there. For example, fossils of one of the world's first reefs can be found in the mountains of Nevada because 520 million years ago, the peaks of these mountains were the ocean floor. Beautiful, tropical reefs. Researchers who studied these mountains in the middle of the desert said it felt like they were taking a walk on the ocean floor. I mean, visually, of course. They're nothing special, just the usual mountains, but if you take a closer look, and even better, grab a microscope, it becomes clear that the rocks are full of fossilized remains of ancient life. In the same way, in the Texas mountains, scientists found traces of a reef that was here 265 million years ago. So it's quite possible that in another 200 million years or so, future scientists will encounter a similar scene. Of course, it's important to note that there will be an ocean, there will be mountains, this will go away, this will come up, are just predictions based on what we know about the planet's past. Plus, scientists have only recently begun this type of forecasting. Before that, all studies were centered on the past. So if you're watching this video 200 million years after it came out and nothing like this happened, don't say I made it all up. It's not me, it's the scientists. But at this moment, there are other continental separation processes going on around the world that we don't see. The Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden are examples of these rifts at more advanced stages of evolution. If you look at the map, you'll see how perfectly the land areas match up with each other. And that's because they formed when the Arabian Peninsula split off from the Horn of Africa due to the rift of the Red Sea. This rift started in the Eocene, that is 56 to 33.9 million years ago. The map clearly shows that at that time there was no Arabian Peninsula. It was one whole with Africa. Basically, it's the same thing we see now, but with a different section of the African continent. The separation process sped up in the Oligocene, 33.9 to 23.03 million years ago. On the map, you can clearly see how the land started to break apart, eventually forming a sea. It kept expanding, and it still is. For example, in 2005, after a 3-week period of tectonic activity, the sea grew by 26 feet, which is a pretty big acceleration. Scientists believe that over time, the Red Sea will turn into an ocean, just like the rift in East Africa. It's literally the same process. It's just that humanity caught the Red Sea at a later stage. The same goes for the Aden Gulf. It was formed through the same process, just on the other side of the Arabian Peninsula. By the way, if scientists are so eagerly making geological forecasts, do they know what the big island that'll break off from Africa will look like? Well, it's important to understand that before this island reaches India and causes all sorts of changes in the landscape, it'll be a piece of land completely isolated from the continents for tens or even hundreds of millions of years. We know what isolated islands look like. Just take Madagascar, for example. Originally, it was part of the ancient continent Gondwana and became independent in 2 steps. First, what would later be Madagascar separated from Africa with India 150 million years ago. There was this small mini-continent. Then, about 90 million years ago, a mini-continent drifted over the Marian Hotspot, a mantle plume that's now located under the Antarctic plate to the south. After that, the land was covered with lava. It's suggested that as a result of this thermal explosion, the continent split into 2 parts, Madagascar and India, which on its way north to Asia, scraped past the eastern coast of Madagascar, leaving a very straight coastline there. This long story of separation from other continents allowed plants and animals on the island to develop in relative isolation. As a result, Madagascar is home to various endemic plants and animals that aren't found anywhere else on Earth. I mean, about 90% of all plant and animal species found in Madagascar are endemic. So we can assume that the new island that is separated from Africa will be unique. Not right away, of course, but evolution will do its thing. The animals and plants that'll be there will turn into completely unique species. It's true that you can't predict what animals will be there at the time of separation. It'll happen who knows when. And even more so, you can't guess what they'll be like by the time they arrive in India. 200 million years is a really long time. Most likely, during that time, all living beings on the planet will change their appearance. Some species will go extinct completely. Some will change beyond recognition, and new ones will emerge. Right now, all sorts of animals are living in Kenya, Somalia, Tanzania, and Mozambique. These include cheetahs, giraffes, baboons, zebras, hyenas, elephants, as well as buffalo, rhinos, and hippos, plus a bunch of other smaller creatures, not just mammals. But saying that these specific animals will end up on an isolated island and swim to India is not correct. Just so you know, 200 million years ago, elephants looked like this, some kind of forbidden love baby of a turtle and a rhino. These animals were called Dicynodonts. They were actually the ancestors of mammals, even though they really looked more like reptiles and had beaks and tusks, and some even lived during the time of the dinosaurs. Basically, 200 million years ago, animals had very little in common with today's animals. So in 200 million years, everything will be completely different. Not to mention that over such a time span, animals can migrate countless times. Plus, there are climate changes. We can't even guess who will end up in an isolated area at the moment of its actual separation. Maybe descendants of polar bears, together with giant hummingbirds and flying sloth-like creatures with bulging eyes. But let's get back to the rift that started this video. In the few days since it appeared, it's been filled with a mixture of concrete and stones. Now the area is being used as a road again, as if nothing ever happened. It's like the continent isn't splitting apart at all. However, there's an explanation for this. Experts have concluded that the crack seen at the beginning of the video actually formed due to soil erosion beneath the surface. The vast structure of the East African Rift may have played at most a very minor and indirect role in the formation of this crack. But the media did what the media do. Who cares about soil erosion when they can write that Africa is breaking apart right in front of our eyes? If you look at the numerous images and videos of the cracks, it becomes clear that they aren't tectonic in origin. The two sides of the crack don't match in shape, making it impossible to fit them together like two puzzle pieces. Also, the crack isn't fully continuous. There are soil bridges between the parts, and there aren't any clear ledges, and the ground is flat on both sides of the crack. And yet, the fact that Africa is splitting apart remains. Whether it's related to the crack or not doesn't really matter. Other African rifts. In fact, this isn't the first crack on the African continent. In 2005, a rift was observed in the Afar Desert in Ethiopia, which formed in just a few days. While many believe that heavy rains were responsible for its appearance, geologists argued that it was actually caused by tectonic processes. In other words, it was the opposite. The Afar Desert is where three tectonic plates meet: the Nubian, Somali, and Arabian plates. But this wasn't discovered right away. As you may recall, scientists have long believed that all of Africa was on a single plate. Will the crack spread? Time will tell. But Mercy Bure, a geologist at Baringo Technical College, pointed out that the active fault and tectonic plate movement in this area is a little worrying. She said that the ongoing flow of magma from the Earth's mantle might cause the fault to widen even more. How did they even find this crack? It's not like someone just happened to stumble across it and let the scientists know. We owe it to satellites. Researchers from the UK, the US, and Ethiopia discovered using radar data from the Envisat satellite that the fault appeared in just 3 weeks. Remember the Red Sea expansion? Well, there you go. In a sense, it was a debut for the satellite. For the first time, researchers used such equipment to track faults. Plus, thanks to Envisat, they found out that the separation of tectonic plates can sometimes happen suddenly, not gradually. Pros of a rift. Yeah, there are indeed some benefits to these rifts. For instance, the split-off parts of the continent could give certain countries a coastline. For countries that currently have no access to the sea, like Rwanda, Uganda, Burundi, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Malawi, and Zambia, having their own coastline would be a nice bonus. At least because right now they depend on their neighbors for shipping. These countries use the ports of Kenya and Tanzania to access the sea, the port of Mombasa in the Indian Ocean, and the port of Dar es Salaam. All of this doesn't come cheap. With the coastline, these nations would have the chance to build their own ports for direct trading with global partners. Yes, it's expensive and time-consuming, but this move promises a significant reduction in international logistics costs. Additionally, there will be a chance to develop the shipping and fishing industries. The only problem is that millions of years have to pass before this shoreline appears. New continent. Faults are happening in different places all over the world. Tectonic plates are constantly moving, and here's more proof. A new study suggests that the Indian tectonic plate could split apart soon. Unlike East Africa, where there's a vertical rift, in India the process is different. The plate may break apart horizontally. According to assumptions, 2 layers about 62 miles thick each might emerge. The thing is, the Indian tectonic plate is moving north at a speed of about 0.04 to 0.08 inches per year, and at this pace it could collide with the Eurasian tectonic plate. This won't happen tomorrow or next year or even in a million years. Estimates suggest it'll take around 60 million years to form mountains of enormous height. Wait a minute, I've already heard about mountains, but it involved a piece of Africa. In here, though, it seems India will manage on its own. This already happened once, and the Himalayas were born. There are many different hypotheses about their formation, but one of them claims that the Indian tectonic plate has high buoyancy, which prevents it from sinking into the mantle, and instead it dives under the Eurasian plate or slides over it. Traveling dinosaurs. In Brazil and Cameroon, nearly identical dinosaur footprints were found, left 120 million years ago. So what's the big deal, you might ask? Sure, dinosaurs had legs and they could walk around. They could leave footprints and all that. But for the footprints to be this similar on different continents, that's something new. Once upon a time, modern Brazil and Cameroon were part of a supercontinent called Pangaea, and dinosaurs could very well stroll back and forth. 120 million years ago, the walk was short, and the dinosaurs that left those tracks might have been some of the last to do so. That's because around this time, the supercontinent Gondwana split from Pangaea, severing the geological connection, especially the narrow link between present-day Africa and South America, Cameroon, and Brazil. During the entire existence of Pangaea, animals could move freely across this link, or similar ones. The dinosaurs making a now impossible journey were representatives of several species, including some theropods, sauropods, ornithischians. However, despite all the diversity of species, it was clear that they took their strolls around the same time, the last walks across Pangaea. Everything started to change 140 million years ago when the tectonic plates carrying Africa and South America began to drift apart. And over time, dinosaurs lost their prehistoric visa-free travel. Now the distance between their footprints is about 3,700 miles in a whole ocean, although before the traces were on the same landmass but about 620 miles apart. But the most important thing is that traces that have survived to this day, totaling over 260, once again show that the movement of tectonic plates is a very ancient phenomenon that began millions of years ago. Not that anyone really doubts it, of course. You sure you hit the like button? See you later.